Welcome, everyone. Again, we're going to get started. We are so glad that you could join us today, and I would like to kick us off by turning it over to Pete Tsaronis, the founder and chief executive officer of Dots and Bridges, and the former chief technology officer at the U.S. Department of Energy. Pete, please take it away.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Nika. Thank you, John White, and of course, all the great folks at the National Renewable Energy Lab. I'm super honored, and as I said earlier today when we were just getting prepped, I wish we had several hours. And for our audience who are attending, thank you. There's so much we will cover, and I'm going to steal from Emily. This is an appetizer, folks, of the kind of dialogue that we may have over the course of the year with folks like Adrian and Jim, and of course, Juan. So I'm going to... Yes, I'm Pete Tsaronis. I worked at DOE and I love this space. And really, I just want to be a part of the conversation. I'm going to set some context of what you'll take away today. The title, Managing Cyber Physical Risk Across Evolving Critical Infrastructure, it's a lot. But when you really think about it, what's going on in the world, these are the sectors that by definition are those assets, systems, and networks, whether physical or virtual, that are considered so vital to the United States that their incapacitation or destruction would have a debilitating effect on security, national economic security, national public health or safety, or any combination thereof. A mouthful, but that comes directly from our United States Department of Homeland Security and the organization that really governs the sectors that we depend on each and every day. Today, we may reference terms like national critical infrastructure functions, cyber physical security. You're going to get to hear from Juan Torres and Jim Hempstead and Adrian Lotto, who I'll introduce here in a minute. But we have a lot to cover, and this is, again, a sampling. So we encourage dialogue, questions, and hopefully some follow-up. So with that, our guests today, Juan Torres, Associate Laboratory Director, Energy Systems Integration at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, one of 17 national laboratories in our country. Juan, it's great to see you, buddy.
Hey, Pete, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
You got it. I'm not reading your bio or anybody, so I'll allow that. That'll be our first question. Talk a little bit about everyone's journey and background. Adrian Lotto, Chief Risk and Resilience Officer at the New York Power Authority, a colleague and a friend, and someone who had a really great walkabout at the United States Department of Energy, of which we will discuss when we fill in some blanks on her decorated career. Adrian, it's great to see you.
Same here. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining.
And last, of course, and not least, my brother from another mother, Villanova graduate, Jim Hempstead, Managing Director at Moody's Investor Service, who I am super excited to have in this conversation because Jim is a cyber physical security expert, understands critical infrastructure from the New York City, Wall Street investment perspective, which I think will really round out our discussion. So it's great to see you, Jim.
Good to see you too, Pete. Good to be here. Thank you.
All right. Well, without further ado, context, I hope, was set. There will be references throughout to executive orders and references and artifacts for our audience to review, but we will cover a lot. But at the end of the day, what we hope to convey here is the role that government, academia, what National Renewable Energy Laboratory is doing in spades, how utility, consumers and stakeholders and folks that deliver the electricity and power to our homes each and every day. And of course, how we can help that sector, in the case of Moody's, improve upon and accelerate or move the needle towards a more resilient power grid and leverage the opportunity that cyber and physical security can do for our lives and protect humanity. So Juan, I'm going to kick it back to you to start out, if that's okay. A little bit about you, your passion. You've had an incredible career serving the national laboratory community, and you had some great news recently with the recent announcement that is of our the Clean Energy Cybersecurity Accelerator. So take the floor, talk a little bit about your passion and why you love doing what you do.
Hey, Pete, thanks. Yeah. This conversation here is it's decades in the making, right? We've been working on the area of cybersecurity, physical security, cyber physical systems for a long time, but in a way that's been really different because the systems have been evolving much more rapidly over the past couple decades. I've been in the labs for a long time. My career started at Sandia 31 years ago, and came over to NREL because as I worked more and more in the cyber energy space, I really wanted to work at a laboratory whose mission was around energy and where there was a big need. Right back in I think the early days of my career in cybersecurity in the 90s, people were just worried about making sure that they have their firewalls facing the right direction in the energy space. That's where we were in the conversations. And I'd say over the last 15 years or so, we've seen significant acceleration in what I would say the use of variable generation, but also technologies that are what's called the grid edge around the energy infrastructure, specifically near the consumer, where the consumer has much more touch and control and interaction. And we're seeing that's even going to change more because of things like electrification of the transportation system. Many more electric vehicles and charging stations and things of that nature. We're seeing way more distributed generation near the consumer with smart buildings, smart homes. I mean, my thermostat, I can control from my cell phone. And we can do things like that on mass scale. So what really excites me is the fact that there is so much opportunity. There are many challenges, but there's a lot of opportunity right now. And you bringing together the various stakeholders here are what's needed and what's key. This is not something we at the national laboratories can address alone. We don't own the infrastructure. We do great research, we do great science, and not just at NREL, but at all the national laboratories. We partner with them. But having Adrian and Jim here are really, really important because this is not just a technology solution space. This is, we have to bring technology and align it with operations and with regulation and policy and business models in order to really address some of these big challenges that we see coming at us. But in the end, I think we can be much better off if we're having these kinds of conversations. So, my passion, you ask about that is really, really around addressing this big challenge around, cyber energy. I'd say that when in my early career, I was a cyber guy doing energy work, and I kind of moved over to becoming an energy guy doing cyber work, right? And seeing it from both sides there. In the end, the big challenge here is really getting us all talking. This is where it all starts. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and have this kind of conversation.
Thank you, Juan, and we're going to move to Adrian, but some of the things you mentioned, grid edge, electrification, distributed energy. Folks, if you've tracked in the news about edge computing, zero trust architectures, sensor-based networks, this is that smart grid concept that's been around for at least, if I go back to 2008, and we will, again, I will reference some artifacts for our audience to read up on because there's a lot to take in. So thank you for those opening remarks, Juan. Adrian, listen, New York Power Authority is leading that charge. It's a utility of one of many in our country. Climate change is big to the DNA. Same question to you. Your passion, your purpose, and why NYPA is really trailblazing in this space of clean energy and innovation.
Thanks so much, Pete. So personally, my passion has revolved around really getting my alignment between some of the work I did at DOE and operationalizing that inside of the utility, right? So I think sometimes there's a little bit of a disconnect, maybe sometimes a big disconnect between national federal policy and maybe perhaps some of the lack of understanding of how it would actually get implemented into a utility. And so providing that insight to the federal government, being able to influence those types of federal policies, and then taking some of that really good work that is coming out of things like the DOE lab. We have a partnership with NREL on the clean energy side, and making it tangible, making it real. As Juan articulated clearly, right? These are big problems. EV technology, for example, here in New York, largely, if you look at the infrastructure build out is done by Tesla. When you pull that away, there's a big gap. Understanding what role NYPA can play to lean forward in areas like that. And then I think the point Juan also raised about incentivizing, right? So the stakeholders in this area are vast. it's not just, right, the federal government issues a policy, the DOE labs kind of create a technology to solve a problem. Jim can articulate there is an entire regulated industry around this, not just on the operational side of FERC and NERC, but we also have Moody's, S&P, shareholders, regulators who are, influence business decisions. And so whether you're an IOU, a muni, or a co-op, understanding the different business models and what can incentivize and drive some of these technologies out of the labs, but into market, into a utility like NYPA, I think is key. So that's sort of where I think this panel is going to be so informative, because you've brought together all key stakeholders that really play a role. I'm grateful.
Yeah, thank you, Adrian. And again, this is a taste, folks, because Adrian, you hit on operationalizing policies, right? There's plenty of them. Folks, again, I'm just going to shoot a few out there right now. We've had the Executive Order 14028 on improving the nation's cybersecurity. It's a great read, May 2021. The Clean Energy Cybersecurity Accelerator, Juan will get to that, was just announced this month. National Security Memorandum on improving cybersecurity for critical infrastructure control systems, July of this year. And don't forget about the National Cyber Strategy that's 3 years old. There's 10 others I can shout out. So thank you, Adrian, for talking about that, and partnerships you stressed, the multiple stakeholders, and the business models that vary from utility to utility. So thank you. Jim, segue to you. Obviously, Moody's has a very unique role, and I think this is a very exciting opportunity to have you on this panel. I know you've done this before in the government Beltway circuit, but having your perspective as a cybersecurity expert, talk a little bit about, obviously your passion, but what makes Moody's unique in this space? Because not only are you the Moody's that we know to be, but you also rely a lot on analytics and engagement with these stakeholder communities.
That's right, Pete. Thanks. So personally, it's been a fun ride. I got involved in the utility, power, energy and power sector back in 1991. And so, I've done a long time. I started out as an investment banker for a couple of firms, and then I've been at Moody's now coming on almost 20 years, actually. And so it's been absolutely outstanding to work with critical infrastructure like utilities, like water, pipelines, gas, but also the other infrastructure sectors. So airports, toll roads, and seaports, and things of that nature. This critical infrastructure is very important on many different levels. From a credit rating perspective, our project and infrastructure finance team, we rate over $3 trillion worth of debt globally in this critical infrastructure space. And critical infrastructure securities have a much lower default rate than non-financial corporates. And so it really speaks to the business model and the revenue model and the jurisdictions that these assets and businesses operate in. And a number of years ago, we started to focus a lot on cyber risk. And cyber risk is a rising risk. We still see it as event risk. We see it as an enterprise-wide risk. So it resides at the board of directors or the trustees or the other governance organization that's involved in that. And we're very excited to learn more about it, get our arms around it, define cyber risk, because there's lots of words that people think about when you say cyber, and sometimes it's good to get everybody on the same page. Define it, identify it, measure it, and track progress and things of that nature. And that's what Moody's is doing right now. Our parent organization, Moody's Corporation, recently announced a transaction with a company called BitSight, which is in cybersecurity ratings assessment company. And we're very happy to start marrying the quantitative data that we could look at to inform and enrich our credit analysis as much as we can.
Well, thank you, Jim. And you used some terms that I think our audience may or may not be as familiar with inside the Beltway, but credit ratings. I think that's something that is significant, because your purpose, at least I feel, is to help a utility, large and small, as Adrian pointed out, get where it needs to, and understanding some have maybe more funding or can allocate dollars to investment. But again, it's a bipartisan role you play, which is educating, as I say, the C-suite to the Main Street folks. And you do an incredible job at that. And I know that's something that is important to you, making sure everybody understands. And with your analytics at Moody's, I think it paints a wonderful picture. Before we jump into the first segment, where I'm going to come back to Juan and we're going to talk about the accelerator, Jim mentioned, and so did Adrian, folks, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, if you Google it, it will talk about safety, public trust, passenger, freight rails, power infrastructure, environmental protection, all the things that we're trying to improve for humanity's sake, right? A smart grid, a smart building, a smart car. Yes, there's the fear of the internet and breach, and the threat landscape's expanded. Today, we'll talk a bit about how we're bringing together those communities of interest to learn from one another and recognize we're never going to eliminate risk, but we can mitigate it. And I think moving to Juan here, talking about this announcement earlier this month, it's a huge step in the right direction. So Juan, back to you. Can you speak to specifically the Clean Energy Cyber Accelerator and what its promise is, even though it's in these early stages?
Yeah, Pete, we're really excited to kick off the accelerator. The background on that is, if you think about it, just in the electricity sector, we've got over 3,000 utilities. And with how quickly cybersecurity and cyber technologies are advancing, we really want to get things deployed. I should say the threat is really advancing. We really need to make sure we get the security technologies deployed as quickly as possible. And there's not always great coordination across all these member stakeholders in in that sector. This is the government through Department of Energy, specifically, the Office of Energy Efficiency, Renewable Energy, and CSER, Cybersecurity, Energy Security, and Emergency Response, who I know Adrian knows really well. They've come together to seed a capability and a program where then utilities can kind of pull some resources together to get the benefit, right, of those resources in partnership with some of the innovators in the cybersecurity space, so that we can really advance the development of those technologies. And we're validating those with some of the experts at NREL at a capability called the ARES Cyber Range. So ARES is Advanced Research on Integrated Energy Systems. It is a unique capability, brings together capabilities at the facility behind me, the Energy Systems Integration Facility, as well as a larger capability. I can go into more detail on specifically what's there. But basically, we can see how these technologies would really work in a lab setting, but be able to scale through our virtual environment so that we can reduce that risk for the owners and the operators. And they say, hey, if I deploy this on my entire utility, how would this really work? And when we can hypothesize on a system that they don't have today, but as they're saying, hey, but in 5 or 10 years, I know I'm going to have way more distributed resources and way more charging points and whatever it is, where we don't have to wait for them to build that. We can actually explore how some of these cyber technologies would work here. So there's huge benefit for the utilities to pull resources, as well as explore hypothetical scenarios, situations, but get some real confidence, because we have real hardware, we have real systems here, real experts to really be able to push those technologies out the door, get them deployed, get them commercialized, and start making a difference. DOE is providing the initial resources to get this thing kicked off. Ultimately, I think I would really like to see the partners out there, having much more say in what technologies we need to look at, what things we need to evaluate and test, where are the threats going, what are the real issues. So it'll be a great conversation with all of these different stakeholders there. And where NREL comes in is, look, we just want to provide that independent perspective. We want to provide the insights as to where we see energy systems going. And the other piece is, the threat. Our work with the Department of Energy, gives us that perspective of how is the threat evolving, how is it changing, and how can we address it with concepts, not just the technologies, but how you actually deploy and operate the system. So super excited to get this kicked off. We had a great event here a couple weeks ago. The Deputy Secretary of Energy, Deputy Secretary Turk, announced this. So we're raring to go. People can get more information at our website at nrel.gov about the accelerator, and looking forward to getting many more partners from industry.
Yeah, thank you. And again, that was just a sampling, because folks, this accelerator is really, to me personally, something that is an opportunity if you're an investor, if you're an entrepreneur, if you are another national lab, if you are a utility, to be involved. This is a bigger challenge we face each and every day as human beings, and we depend on the operational technology, the information technology, and kudos to NREL, which again, folks, is a national laboratory that is globally recognized. It's not just an energy, if you will, not that there's anything wrong with that institution. By the way, if you have questions, our participants, please, send us a note or a question to our guests, as we can answer those in real time. Okay, let me go down. Thank you again, Juan. That was a good taste of the cyber energy, clean energy cybersecurity accelerator. That's a mouthful. Adrian, Vision 2030, New York Power, its focus and its strategic priorities on digitization and cybersecurity, something that's near and dear. Your role mitigating risk and enhancing resilience and doing whatever it takes. Hearing what is being built at NREL, can you talk a little bit about this opportunity for any and all utilities and how it aligns with NYPA?
Sure, absolutely. So I think Juan touched on a couple of key things there, right? First, he mentioned the path of the forward of where we are to go, where we believe we're going, right? DERs, the future, building energy infrastructure systems that are secured from the outset and designed for security at the outset. But then he also mentioned, if you notice, legacy equipment, right? Which still exists in the system. So I think one of the keys that a program like ARES affords is the ability to understand, the pathway of the future. EV, DERs will happen, but it's a journey. We're not there yet. So understanding kind of what that United States roadmap will look like, how it will impact business. These are things that are contained within Vision 2030 here at NYPA, the plan for a more, the first end-to-end digital utility. But that comes with challenges, right? Cloud infrastructure is a key challenge for us. Understanding who's operating what clouds, whether it should be a private cloud, a secure cloud, looking at things like market capitalization, right? So for example, if we build our own NYPA secure cloud, we can capitalize that. Yet if we use something like the Amazon cloud, which likely will have a lot more built-in security, we can't capitalize that. That's O&M. So understanding the different business models with the security overlay becomes critically important. And I think in my role as the Chief Risk and Resilience Officer here at the New York Power Authority, you have to be able to connect all of those dots, right? Connect what's happening on the federal level with policy, where the pathway of the future is, and then make it really tangible in terms of your investments, where you're going to spend your dollars, and how you're going to get your, the return. So there's a lot here to unpack, but I think understanding the journey and how we're going to get there, it's not going to happen overnight. I think, as Juan said, bringing key stakeholders together is prime.
Adrian, I'm going to go to Jim here, but you brought up this introduction of things like the cloud, analytics, leveraging data for actionable intelligence. A smart city, I always like to say, is not something you buy. It's something you build and develop, and it requires a lot of the communication, the most basic form of connectivity, communication that is interoperable and works and is secure. Jim, coming to you as someone who is out there having discussions and running surveys and having conversations that matter, as a cyber physical security expert working with your brethren in the utilities, not so much as you're not big brother. It's sharing and understanding, do they understand the risk that they take on each and every day as our technology evolves? And I'm looking at challenges like multi-stakeholder environments that a utility maintains, the heterogeneity in regulatory and business environments. It speaks to Adrian's business models. Putting on your cyber hat, IT guy that you are, what are some of those conversations and challenges that you're feeling like maybe a couple of years ago were tough to have, and now folks are kind of getting it, that you see Colonial happen, you see ERCOT, you see Hurricane Katrina and Ida and Sandy, and then we realize, man, we got to beef up our infrastructure.
Right. So at Moody's, what we do is we provide the capital markets our opinion around credit risk, the probability of default and the losses given a default. What we're doing as an organization, as our entire company, is we're working towards a one Moody's integrated risk assessment strategy. And there are lots of complementary services that we have in our other parts of our organizations. At Moody's Analytics, we recently purchased RMS, which is a climate risk and cyber modeling company. 427, which is a physical climate data company, and things of that nature. And we're using and leveraging the data and the metrics to inform and enrich how we're thinking about credit analysis. And the hard lift that we're chasing is the ability to do this consistently across asset classes and consistently across regions and jurisdictions, without the rigidity in the implementation of our process. And that's important because, each airport is different, each utility is different. Is it publicly owned? Is it privately owned? Is it a cooperative? Is it a JAA? And things of that nature. And this is important because our journey in the cyber area has grown a lot over the last 5 years. We are doing an issuer survey. We launched it to the utility space in the very beginning of the pandemic in March of 2020. We published the anonymized and aggregated results in late last year, in October, November of last year. We've published about 7 or 8 other reports on other sectors, and we'll wrap that all up. An issuer survey is just one simple tool that we can use to provide insight, but Moody's is a trusted brand with investors, and it's a trusted brand with what I call issuers, because we don't say companies, because we rate lots of governments and other types of enterprise organizations. And we're trying to use that trust to create a dialogue and to create a language around bridging the gap between cyber risk and the technicals around that, with credit risk, cost of capital, and the conversations that are often held in the board of directors. And so that effort requires a lot of stakeholder engagement. And cyber, as a big cyber risk process, is a risk management process that needs stakeholder engagement. And that is what we're mostly working on. The conversation has shifted. 5 years ago, a lot of people didn't want to talk to us, especially CISOs didn't want to talk to us and engage, because they were concerned that if I say something bad, Moody's is going to downgrade my credit rating. Today, that is mostly been ironed out. And the engagements that we're having with utilities, with CISOs and other technology officers is much more proactive and more detailed, because we're getting better at asking the questions, and we're getting better at understanding the answers, and we're getting better at having a more fulsome dialogue with the stakeholders. And the technology people are no longer afraid that if they say something to us, it's going to result in a downgrade, partly because the Treasury Department and the Chief Financial Officer have weighed in and said, no, we need to engage in this. We want the ability to have an independent, objective third party like Moody's help move the dialogue, define the framework. That's going to help our interactions with regulators. It's going to help our interactions on showing progress and things of that nature. So we're seeing a really good momentum with this effort to have a common language.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm seeing Adrian and Juan nod, and I love that you brought this C-suite dialogue, the translation, and hey, you know, I still every day of the week and twice on Sunday remind my mother that I'm not in computers. When she says my son, and he's in computers. I love you, Mom. But no, it's having a conversation about the digitization of something that is, you know, 100 years old, the engineering marvel that is of the grid. So
Can I spin on something here?
absolutely, Adrian, get in the conversation.
I want to make what Jim just said maybe a bit more tangible for some of the folks that are tuning in, like from NREL, because like it's why does it matter, right? So many years ago, if you like, let's say NYPA wants to do a solar installation or LED traffic light, right? Some of our energy efficiency work with some of our own, we have 50 munis and co-ops, MTA is one of our major clients, right? Or customers. Let's say we want to do some of that energy efficiency, forward-leaning, customer-facing work, you know, a lot of which comes out of the DOE National Labs. The same analysis that Jim and his team do over at Moody's on a company like NYPA, we do that same thing here within NYPA in terms of credit risk for those other organizations. So getting something like even a solar panel installation goes through that same credit review, just at a much smaller scale, Moody's input being one of them. What, you know, we look at all sorts of different things, but it becomes, this is where some of the financial implications really become tangible as we're trying to advance DERs out in the market. It's a cascading impact. So I just think it's, you know, I know when I was sitting at DOE, quite frankly, this connection of dots, I love your thing, dots and bridges, right? That connection of dots from something like Moody's all the way down to like the installation of a solar panel didn't really kind of hit home. But now sitting where I sit as the CRO, all of those dots and bridges have been connected, just to play off your company name.
Adrian, thank you. And again, folks, that wasn't staged. I love Adrian, but I appreciate it. It's just an innate thing. My wife came up with it. Juan, let's pivot to you in light of that, because I want to tee it up with, you know, cybersecurity at the end of the day. You know, it is in your DNA. And I'm looking at some of the guests we have. We see another Villanovan out there, Kevin Buggy on the webinar. Thank you, Kevin, for joining, and someone who in Chi-Town respects this discussion. Appreciate that. Cybersecurity, the innovation, balancing risk and innovation, Juan. You know, you talked about the grid edge and the evolution of sensor-based and measurement and using science to determine, you know, where we can be more prescriptive in the health of our grid. Cybersecurity, some of the I was on a call this week with Avi Gopstein at the NIST, and he talked about some of those challenges that we face, yes, but secure design principles, securing by designing from within, not bolting on. Defense in depth, zero trust, fail secure, comprehensive auditing. Putting on that hat, Juan, you're a strategic associate lab director, but your experience is growing up in this space. The threat landscape's real. Ransomware's real. Right? What excites you about, though, this moving the needle and bringing people together, knowing that, hey, we're going to beat this, but we also need to keep the conversation going. It's not a quick fix, buy something, plug it in, and say you're safe.
No, you're exactly right, Pete. You know, there's I'll give you a quick story and maybe set the stage, you know, on this particular topic. So, you know, go back a few years ago when we were, let's just say it was in the early 2000s in the ARA days, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act days. And we were in a mode where as a nation, you know, we're investing in our infrastructure, investing in smart grid and things like that. And I remember getting a phone call during that time and we said, look, we're putting out mass numbers of smart meters. And we just realized now, these have remote disconnect functions. Did we really think about the security that we should be implementing there? So if somebody hacks in, they don't just start shutting off everybody's lights. And en masse, if you were to shut off, a lot of meters, that actually can affect the stability of the grid. Losing a lot of the load rapidly, or even adding a lot of load rapidly, it can affect the stability of the grid. And back then, we just weren't having those conversations. Our response was, at this point, it's something we can jump on. It's something we can address now. But if we wait too long, you're going to have many of these meters without those security functions in place. And so we need to get on it pretty quickly. Well, we did address it. So it forced conversations that we haven't been having in the past. We had, there was the market driver saying we need to get more of these technologies that make us more efficient in operations at the utility level, that make things easier for consumers, that make things easier for utilities. But the people getting into those markets weren't necessarily security experts. As they were developing some really awesome technologies, they didn't necessarily have the threat understanding. We're at a different place now. We have a better understanding of where IT and OT is used, how it's used, how it's evolved, what are the new standards, what are the new technologies. And then you get into things that are now, coming into play. Artificial intelligence and autonomous systems, right? And machine learning, and how is all this going to be used in our everyday energy system? And how does that change? How does that change how we should be thinking about security? Right. So your point about the fact that we need to be inherently designing security into these systems starts with that initial conversation. What's really needed? How is it going to be used? Where is it going to be used? And before we ever even consider deploying anything like that, you need to have the stakeholders. And I think Adrian's right on point here. She's got that bird's eye view of where can we have an impact? Where can we make a difference across the spectrum of actually getting something deployed, and then even afterwards operating it through, right? And so this is where I get really excited that we are in a different place, right? We're much smarter about even considering or thinking the various aspects of securing these systems. So that doesn't mean we have it figured out, and that's why it doesn't mean we have it figured out, because the threat continues to evolve, technology continues to evolve, and it will continue. That's just the nature, right, of a market-based economy. It's the nature of advancements. That's getting smarter about technology, and how we as consumers even change how we use the system, right? The things we're asking our energy system to do today are not the things our grandparents were asking it to do back then. They were not talking about, hooking up their Bluetooth and, I want to be able to charge my car, and I want to do, that just wasn't part of the conversation. And I can tell you in 10 years, we're going to be talking about other things that we're not doing with our system today. So we always have to be forward thinking, and we need to make sure we're getting the right people in the conversation.
I appreciate that. Jim, you have a comment? Because I have a question for you that's coming in from the audience.
I was going to just make a quick comment that, what we have seen in some of the work that's been done is most of the cyber events that have been disclosed publicly, they're not the kind of events that'll knock an organization down, in the sense that they're affordable. The median loss is not overwhelming to an organization. But as the median loss continues to rise, the standard deviation, those extremes are also rising, and those events can knock a company down. The Colonial Pipeline interruption in May was a wake-up call, because it wasn't about the operations as much as it was about the IT, and how the IT obscured the ability for them to effectively work on the operations. And that got a lot of attention across us. But what we're looking for are the big permanent impacts. How does a cyber event affect your revenue or your reputation, or a regulatory response, or litigation, or how does it affect your liquidity and things of that nature? So we're very much focused on those. And we have had a handful of credit rating actions that have been directly related to cyber events. And our expectation is that could be rising going forward because of the advancement of ransomware and AI threats and things of that nature, just so exactly what Juan was talking about.
Appreciate that, Jim. I'm gonna jump down to Adrian, which is a question that I'm taking in here from Mike about an analyzing or doing due diligence when looking at new capabilities or needing capability, right? Technology diligence. You know, the investor community, I had a great opportunity during my time and to this day working with and helping distill value to a specific company. Not everything can do everything for everyone, but there's a niche usually. And shout out to really quickly the research areas that Juan and team: renewable energy to grid integration, energy storage, energy security, energy resilience, advanced mobility, grid interactive buildings, hydrogen and fuel systems. There's a lot of work being done there to develop and invent. Adrian, you're a utility. You work with the C-suite. You're looking to mitigate risk and you will purchase products. The question is, how do you do that due diligence at a utility? Is it your decision? Are you part of the discussion? Is it the CIO, the CISO?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, but I think you actually queued it up well. I think the first thing is, what is the problem you are trying to solve, right?
Great.
So clearly identifying the problem statement, because as you just said, Pete, not every cyber tool, if you think of like the MITRE ATT&CK framework, not every tool is meant to address the full spectrum, right? Some are going to be trying to gain transparency. Some are, right? It just depends on what the issue is. So I think being on the lookout for, you know, we are NYPA is obviously a government authority. So all of our stuff with regard to cyber, any problems we're trying to solve, get issued via an RFP or an RFI, that type of thing. But there is a component of our budget that is set aside for what we call R&D. And that's how we've partnered with, NREL is one of our labs that we've partnered with. We're partnering with Argonne National Lab on some climate study work that they're doing for us to understand what the grid in New York will look like as a result of impacts of climate change. And then we also work with a group called EPRI, and we have a significant investment, you know, I think it's around $5 billion or something. Well, it is $5 billion for R&D with EPRI. So, you know, the short answer is utilities are leaning forward, right? We are all, and I feel comfortable saying this, I don't know any big utility that isn't seeking to lean forward and solve problems in this area. We all have R&D budgets that are set aside. So I think to the extent that, you know, you have a program that's out there that's unique, that's offering something that the market hasn't seen, that is something that we're interested in and we want to bring in. And it does go through our, you know, procurement processes. It's usually a panel. The CISO is one of them. And I think Jim has, you know, twice now, if you've noticed, talked about the Board of Trustees role. Any major investment does go through the Board of Trustees, and cyber, boards of trustees never used to even talk about cyber. That is a thing of the past. We talk about cyber every time we meet with our board. So they do have a critical role to play as well.
Jim, comments?
You know, talking to the board of directors about this is critical. The boards of directors, the average demographics of the board of directors raises a question as to, you know, how well are they comprehending the 3-ring binder full of technical reports that go to them. And what we're trying to do at Moody's is distill that down into the language of the board, the language of the capital markets, the language of the financial markets, because it is hard to allocate capital when you only see the cost and you don't see the return. And that is something that we have really been zeroed in on and have been wrestling with, is because it's easy to allocate capital to a new renewable energy project or some other widget maker because you know what the return could be based on your model. You don't have that when you're talking about cyber mitigation or cyber defense in some other way, shape, or form. And we're trying to bridge that gap to identify what those issues are for the board so that they can frame that consideration in the terms of risk versus return and cost of capital implications. And we believe that you don't have to be a cyber expert to understand cyber risk. And so you have technical people like Juan and Adrian and others that can bring you the technical knowledge so that you can make a decision based on what's good for your organization.
Thank you. Juan, I see you nodding. Comments before a question for you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think having, you know, Jim and Adrian here who live in this space, it's good to hear that some of the things that, you know, I've seen and learned over the years, you know, I just reemphasize. Years ago, when I was conducting cyber vulnerability assessments, you know, we found, this is for the utility space, we found that the consequences of concern fell typically into 3 bins, right? Number 1 was, you know, safety. Could somebody get hurt or die? That was something you really worried about. And when you're talking about a power grid, absolutely, you know, those are some things you worry about. Secondly, was financial loss. From a cyber perspective, you know, how would this affect, you know, the revenue, or could something get damaged to a point that it's going to cost a lot of money to replace or fix or whatever it is, right? And the third actually was reputation and, you know, and image and impacts there on the business, right? Would somebody trust this organization anymore? Would somebody trust this utility anymore if they can't protect the information? Maybe it's privacy or whatever it is. But from a general cyber perspective, you know, those were kind of the 3 general categories. And it's consistent. It starts there. You don't have to be a cyber expert to know those things. But then once you've figured out what are those things you're worried about, then you bring in the cyber experts to help you figure out how could we prevent this actually being exploited, and one of these consequences coming to be, you know, through a cyber means. So it's consistent regardless of where the system goes. I believe those are going to be really important to understand.
Appreciate it. Don't go anywhere. I have a question coming back to you, and it's kind of as we kind of come to a close here, and we still got about 10 minutes and some parting shots. You know, the national lab, though, Juan, I threw out, I hope I didn't steal any of your thunder there, some of just the research areas as I look at the capabilities. The lab's amazing, right? The Energy Systems Integration Facility, which you lead, and the ARES initiative is just one of many. And I always like to hear from, and I hope our audience does, that there's so much activity happening every day of the week and twice on Sunday, and as in any sector. And there are people that go to the NREL every day to solve problems. To Adrian's point, you know, what's the problem you're trying to solve? And there's some really smart people who are there doing it. Can you just talk a little bit about some of the excitement around next generation? You know, people ask me all the time, oh, what are we doing with ransomware and blockchain, and how's that going to impact the energy sector? And I'm like, geez, where do I start? What are some exciting initiatives, though, that you are working on and your colleagues that give people hope for humanity?
You know, absolutely. This is why I love working at the national labs. You know, these exciting challenges, the big challenges too. You know, this is, you know, foreign nation state threats. This is impact on the national economy. And, you know, and to touch on one of the questions I saw in the chat as well, you know, about wind turbines. Okay, so we're looking at how do we address the security challenges of today's infrastructure and the things that are moving really rapidly, like more wind, more solar, things of that nature. We're working with the wind sector. We've got a wind cyber consortium. So we are addressing what are the risks around those specific systems. John White, the expert in that particular space, but you can hit our website. We have some more information about that consortium. So if you want to know about what we're doing with the wind industry and the solar and so on, and where we see technology can help and so on, that activity is going on. But, you know, I briefly mentioned earlier some of the exciting things like artificial intelligence. We have a lot of work going on in autonomous systems. In the future, the operators, they're overwhelmed with the amount of information they need to operate these systems, the energy infrastructure. Imagine as we add millions and millions of more devices, you know, even on the Eastern Interconnect, the most complex grid in the world, the Eastern Grid, there are about 10,000 or so control points on that at that level. We're seeing with more devices at the grid edge, the distribution level utilities may have millions of devices that they are collecting information from, or they may even control. So our work in autonomous systems and how do you secure these? We have some great research going on around how you secure these potentially at times untrusted devices. And how do you know that the information you're getting is okay? And what do you do with it if you get something that doesn't look quite right? But the human in the loop can't do that. We're going to have to put a lot more intelligence in the system and be able to trust that system as well. So we have a lot of work in there. We've developed a really unique capability called the Cyber Energy Emulation Platform. So that allows us to have that visualization of the power system layer, the cyber layer, and be able to emulate, create expansions on your utility, expansions on your community. We have some work going on with the city of LA. They're trying to get to 100% clean energy. And how do you do that at the size of community city that they have? We're working with the LA Department of Water and Power. So we can go from simulating and understanding what's possible, and then work with the Ares capability and the real hardware and so on, and explore what's doable, right? So that we provide that link, that bridge. This is not just science. This is not just a simulation, because a lot of times people will say all models are wrong, some models are useful. We go from that to let's really validate and see what we can do that will make a difference. So, smart systems, next generation devices, and at the hardware level, virtual devices, large scale next generation systems, hydrogen. Where's hydrogen play in the future infrastructure, transportation, electric vehicle charging, next generation charging, and how do you secure that? Because the user has to interface with that. So I can go on and on.
Oh, no.
Pete, this is just good stuff.
Yeah, I
It's
love it. No,
exciting to come and do
yeah,
this
it's
every day.
in the theme of sampling, folks. We can talk for hours on each one of those. Adrian, I want to give a shout out back to the Vision 2030. What are you hoping or looking towards in terms of just a goal for the next year with that program underway? Give a shout out to NYPA and its efforts there.
Thanks. So I think it's fundamentally what Jim articulated, looking at Vision 2030. And as we move down the approach and move down, making that vision a reality, ensuring that we're utilizing sound risk management principles with all of our partners. So for example, Juan just talked about hydrogen. We are about to do a first of the nation hydrogen project where we're going to use one of our fossil plants, right? We have in-city meaning, sorry, I'm in New York. So Manhattan, we have a plant right outside of Manhattan. That's one of our peaker plants. We're going to test it for the first time, we think, in the nation, going up to 40% hydrogen. That's going to be a challenge, right? There's a lot to ensure there when you're using hydrogen as a fuel source. But to the point, if we want to get where we believe the nation wants to go of having a clean energy, decarbonized footprint here in the state of New York and frankly in the nation, we believe these are some of the leaning forward tests that we need to do to ensure we're going to get there. Ensuring sound risk management principles along the way is crucial because we don't want to, we of course always have safety first. And we want to make sure that things like, as Juan just said, what he was fundamentally describing there is a control, right? So we have a risk management that identifies all these risks. He's talking about AI, which is, so you have an inherent risk, you have a control. If we could get that human out of the loop in that control, that's as good as we're possibly going to get. And then all that's left is a potential inherent risk, residual risk. So bringing all of these concepts together to ensure that Vision 2030 is no longer a vision, but can actually be effectuated in the next 10 years is what I'm excited about, working with all the partners that, two of which are here today on the call.
Well, I think it's thank you. Appreciate that. But I agree with you 100%. I think it's a beacon. I think anybody who's watching, look at the documents publicly available. I looked at it last night. There's a cheat sheet, and then there's just the lengthy, here's our plan. So I think it's awesome. And thank you. And Jim, before we hit parting shots, you mentioned BitSight. You mentioned what Moody's doing. It has its own plan to keep this conversation going and to help utilities maybe understand that there's innovation happening at a lab and that there's things off the shelf that you can buy. What are you hoping to accomplish in the next year, maybe as part of this collaboration with BitSight?
Thanks, Pete. So one of the things that we're going to be doing is in 2019, we published a cyber risk heat map where we looked at vulnerability and impact across, 30 some odd sectors. I think it was $80 trillion of global rated debt. Now that includes sub-sovereigns and governments and things of that nature. And we're going to update that. And so a lot's changed since 2019. And we think that incorporating a curated data set from BitSight that kind of zeroes in on the things that we're thinking about the most from a credit perspective, as opposed to a cybersecurity posture perspective in terms of how you look at that can inform the way we look at this. And heat maps are relatively simple tools, but they're very useful for the capital markets because you very quickly can rank order different sectors, different regions, and things of that nature to see at least how one organization is talking about cyber risks. So we'll define it and then we'll apply it to this global portfolio and put that out next year. And I hope to see all of our credit research next year use more and more consistent data, like from BitSight and other organizations. We have our issuer survey results that we're always incorporating. So, every time T-Mobile or somebody else has a cyber event, we can enrich the discussion by showing how that particular industry compares to other industries in terms of various different measures, whether it's cloud adoption or patching or, how many levels does it take to get to the CEO and things of that nature. So I think there's going to be a very significant shift in how much you see coming out of the rating agency next year with respect to cybersecurity.
Yeah, 100%. Love it. And I'm excited. Keep writing those reports that folks, again, the Moody's reports are easy to digest and distill. All right, 30 seconds or less, because I got to do the parting shots. It's my favorite part. Juan, let's go with you to start. What do you want to leave with the audience from today's discussion?
Yeah, continue to engage. This is huge. We need to get people talking about these issues, the challenges. Where are things coming? What's on the forefront? What's the next big thing? So stay tuned. The accelerator is going to continue to advance, but there are other things that we're doing in the space, especially around clean energy. And I didn't get into all of that, but stay tuned.
Thank you, JT. Adrian.
Took my words. I was going to say engage. I mean, and I would say particularly for any, female leaders out there who are curious about the area, there's, like Juan said, there's a lot of stuff coming. This is an area that's continuing to evolve. It's continuing to grow. If you have a teenager at home that's, maybe about to go into college, encouraging him to take he or she to take a look at cyber as an area of interest, please do so. And I think that it's not an area, I think sometimes utilities in the past got looked at as like, oh, humdrum, not particularly innovative, not really forward leaning like Silicon Valley. But the truth is it's changing drastically. So it's an exciting field, lean in, and you can really make a difference.
Thank you. Wonderful. Jimmy, bring us home.
3 for 3, Pete. Cyber risk is part of the risk management process, and it requires engagement with a lot of stakeholders and not just the people around you. And I encourage that engagement.
Well, my parting shot is we hit on trusted partnerships, technical translation, credit risk, clean energy. Folks, this was the sampling, stealing again from Emily. Shout out to John White, the entire team that helped pull this together. We will do this again. I'm meeting with Ann Duncan later today, the CIO of Energy, FYI, on cybersecurity for smart cities. So again, this conversation is active, and we appreciate all of those who attended and registered. And thank you again to everyone.